Hi, and welcome back to another film review on Cellar Productions. This time around, we're deciding to tackle the latest Halloween weekend release, Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is a PG-13 horror movie that's based off of the smash hit video game franchise of the same name. And when I tell you the first game was an overnight sensation, I am not exaggerating in the slightest. This game took the world by storm. With that being said though, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm a Five Nights at Freddy's expert, that I've played all the games, that I know all the characters and backstories. Because I don't. I played a little bit of the first one. It never really hit the mark for me, so I just never played the rest. But when you tell me they're making a horror movie out of it, yeah, I'm all in. And I was pretty excited for it, to tell you the truth. Mostly because Matthew Lillard was in it. And I know the Five Nights at Freddy's fan base is a super dedicated one, so trust me when I say I'm going to tread lightly on certain topics here. So the basic plot of this movie is that Mike is the legal guardian of his younger sister Abby, and he gets hired as a nighttime security guard for a formerly famous pizzeria known as Freddy Fazbear's. Basically, it's like Chuck E. Cheese, with arcade, pizza, dancing animatronics, the whole nine. This particular pizzeria was super famous in the 80s, but closed down after a few kids went missing, and that premises was tied into the disappearances. We should also mention that Mike's younger brother was kidnapped decades ago, and that has permanently impacted Mike's psyche throughout the entirety of his life. But while Mike is at the restaurant working security, he notices that there are a few things that are amiss. Most notably, weird electrical surges, strange noises, things being misplaced here and there. But we'll get into that as we discuss the movie in a little bit deeper detail. So if you've played the game or even heard of it in the slightest, then you know that Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, the four main animatronics, are the ones that come to life at night and try to kill anybody that's inside of the restaurant. Now the game is terrifying, with you having to constantly check security cameras, turn on the lights, shut the doors, all while managing your power supply to make it to 6 a.m. when you can escape the restaurant. The movie touches on this just a little bit, enough to keep the fans interested with the references and the callbacks, but as a whole, the movie really focuses on Mike as the protagonist and his goal to find out who kidnapped his little brother. This is really my first problem with the film. And maybe my opinions would have changed a little bit had I played the other games and had I maybe understood the lore of the franchise a bit better. You see, I was really expecting a straight slasher movie with the Freddy Fazbear animatronics just hunting down anybody in the restaurant. And we do get a little bit of that, but as I said, the crux of the plot is focused on Mike and his life and his decisions. The animatronics really feel like a side plot at times, especially when the children's ghosts that are possessing the animatronics show up in Mike's dream. At that point, these ghosts, and thus the animatronics themselves, really feel nothing more than a means to an end for Mike to try and figure out who kidnapped his brother Garrett. And in the same sense, when you do start getting into dream walking and spirits possessing animatronics and ghosts influencing the real world events, it sort of takes away from the slasher aspect and brings it more into the supernatural mysticism aspects that occupy a different subgenre of horror. I'm not saying these two can't mix, because obviously they can, we've seen it in many other films. But I think if you're making a movie based off of a previously established IP, such as Five Nights at Freddy's, and mostly when we're only focusing on the first game, I think you kind of set your own expectations for it to be a slasher and not Paranormal Activity. And if you continue running with that idea, think about the fact that in the first video game, there really was no protagonist. You were an unnamed faceless player that had to survive until 6 a.m. The four animatronics were the ones with the personalities. So by pushing them to be side characters for almost half of this movie makes it so that your script has to build itself not from a foundation that's already established, but from a foundation that you have to create from the ground up. Now that's a lot of legwork, especially in today's day and age, when almost every new film to come out is based on something that was previously released. And the other big thing is that it's rated PG-13, so there's not a lot of gore, there's not a lot of swearing, two things that have become sort of synonymous with horror and especially slashers. I mean, how do you really have a slasher movie without excessive amounts of gore. In today's cinematic landscape that's dominated by so-called intellectual horror and horror movies that aren't afraid to show the bad guy or to show the deaths or to even kill a kid, I mean, look at Talk to Me. It's hard to release one without any of that. Audiences have sort of become expectant of it. And if you're Five Nights at Freddy's or any other horror movie that wants to center itself in this subgenre without the elements of gore and overarching horror, it's a little difficult. It's an uphill battle. But, I mean, Five Nights at Freddy's does succeed at a lot of things. Yeah, they cut away from pretty much all of the kills, but you sort of find the bodies later with a few gashes in them, and that's okay. Because, I mean, when you look at it, the movie still has a whimsical nature to it. There's one scene where Mike, Abby, and Vanessa, the police officer, are sort of just hanging out with the animatronics, building a fort in the Fazbear Pizzeria, and it's incredibly heartwarming. It doesn't mess with the pacing at all, and it's a total tonal shift. Seeing as the animatronics sort of make jokes with their deadpan looks, or just their straight innocence when they're spending time with other people not trying to murder them. And another thing I think they did right was casting Matthew Lillard. I mean, I'm a huge fan. From Scream to 13 Ghosts to Scooby-Doo, Matthew Lillard has certainly made a name for himself as an iconic character actor. So casting him as William Afton, the antagonist in Five Nights at Freddy's, I think was a perfect idea. I mean, even before he put on the Springtrap suit at the end of the movie, he still plays a really convincing sleazebag. I think it's pretty obvious to anticipate that he's the one behind everything about halfway through the movie, but it really doesn't detract from the reveal. But my favorite part of Matthew Lillard in this movie is that when he does finally put on the Springtrap costume and starts attacking Mike and Vanessa in the restaurant, he has to clean his knife off of blood. And how does he do it? Just like Ghostface. I think it was a perfect way to include a subtle little nod without being overbearing in the, hey, look at that guy played another iconic character in another iconic horror movie that we're trying to tie ourselves to. It was none of that. It wasn't pretentious. It was just a little thing that horror freaks like myself could pick up on immediately. And if we're talking references and cameos, the fact that Matt Pat was actually in this movie as a waiter at a diner was unbelievable. I almost fell out of my chair laughing. So props to the filmmaking team for being aware of Five Nights at Freddy's place in internet culture. I thought that Josh Hutcherson was fine as a protagonist in this movie, but to be totally honest, I always felt like his character was really bogged down by his backstory and just the overall character's baggage. And that's probably a good thing for Josh Hutcherson, seeing as how he's able to portray that in such a convincing way means he's a good actor, but I just really wanted to see more of the animatronics. And the last thing I want to touch on is the set design, and I'm gonna include the animatronics in this. The animatronics in Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy looked like they were ripped straight out of the video game. And the design of the pizzeria perfectly encapsulated the vibe of the 1980s pizza arcade that they were going for. Especially when you turn on the electricity in the restaurant, the neon signs light up, the arcade machines start beeping, the ball pit is enticing. But the real standout thing about Five Nights at Freddy's is that the animatronics were 100% practical. Jim Henson's puppet shop are responsible for creating the animatronics and supplying the puppeteers who allowed these things to come to life during the movie. These animatronics are so vivid and lifelike during the film that you almost genuinely think that they're CGI. And when you learn that they're actually there on set, it makes it so much more incredible. Especially nowadays where so many studios are taking animated shortcuts to things that would just add a little bit more to the budget to do it practically. It's so refreshing to see that there are still directors and filmmaking teams dedicated to that same idea of practicality. I would have liked to see Foxy running down a hallway, considering that's his entire gimmick, but since they went the in-person animatronics route, I understand how that could have been a little difficult. At the end of the day, I think that Five Nights at Freddy's was still a super entertaining horror movie, even for somebody who's not a huge fan of the video games. I think that Matthew Lillard and the 80s vibe, the pizzeria, the animatronics, makes it a really interesting watch for almost anybody, especially if you're a fan of the slasher genre. But the last thing I'll leave you with, and not to take anything away from Five Nights at Freddy's, but if you want to see a Five Nights at Freddy's with a lot more gore and a lot more in-your-face murder, check out Willy's Wonderland featuring my favorite Nicolas Cage. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought of Five Nights at Freddy's, or Willy's Wonderland for that matter. And also tell me what movies you think I should cover next, what movies I should be looking out for, and what movies you want to hear talked about. Be sure to share this video with all of your freaky friends. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.